Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
Dr. Newberger, I'm excited. It's Friday again.
Yes.
Believe it or not,
I'm
it is
excited
our
too.
eighth meeting.
Yeah, and I think we can go ahead and get started, and people might be rolling in, but we can get the ball rolling.
Absolutely.
Why don't I go ahead and start? Welcome everyone to the Balkan Circle. My name is Mary Newberger. I am a professor of history here at UT Austin. I'm also the director of the Center for Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies and the chair of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. And Kirill is my co-host.
Thank you very much. And for those of you that do not know me, my name is Kirill Avramov, and I'm an assistant professor of political science at the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. And today we have the immense pleasure of meeting for the 8th time during this semester. It's our 8th guest speaker who will be addressing the topic of the impact of European integration on the rights of minorities in Bulgaria and in Greece. And our guest today is Dr. Nuri Tahir, and also Nuri Korkmaz, known as. And he is an associate professor at the Department of International Relations at the Bursa Technical University, Turkey. And I'm assuming, Nuri, you are speaking from Turkey tonight. And previously, he was a TÜBİTAK visiting scholar at CRIS UT Austin, also a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Leuven, Belgium, and a visiting fellow at the Center of the Southeastern European Studies at the University of Graz, Austria. His research focuses mainly on minorities and nationalism in the Balkans, cross-border cooperation, European integration, migration and borders in the Balkans and in the Middle East. Dr. Tahir has written several articles on the historical and contemporary aspects of the Greek-Bulgarian border region and the settlement of national minorities. He also has co-edited a book entitled Turkey's Migration and Border Policy with Neighboring Countries, that was actually published very recently in July 2021 in Turkish only for now. So Dr. Tahir, we're looking forward for the, not only to welcome you on Balkan Circle, but for the English edition of this important work. So welcome with us. The floor is yours. Благодаря много. Заповядайте.
Благодаря ти, Кирил, много. Yes. Thank you, Mary, as well, for this very nice opportunity to present my research with you this evening. So I'm just trying to find sharing options. Okay. Share screen. Yep. I can go with it now. I hope you can see now my PowerPoint presentation, right?
Yes, clearly visible. If you would
is
like,
it visible?
Yes, yes, Nuri, it is.
Okay. So as I said previously, perhaps this could be quite interesting topic to touch, but at the same time, I wanted to begin also with a map, because this evening, I mean, I'm going to show you lots of maps, because those maps have to do many things with the history, understanding also the regional and the local history in the Bulgarian Greek borderlands. Not only as a, let's say, borderland between two countries, but also as a crossroad from the Middle East to Eastern Europe, generally, let's say. This is a quite interesting map also from the 19th century, where you could see briefly the so-called ethnic division or the ethnic composition of the Southeast Europe. Well, the structure of the presentation, I briefly will talk about the historical background of the minority issues in Bulgaria and Greece, very brief introduction, and the definition of the term minority in the Balkans, what it means, and how is it perceived in both countries. Then formation of contemporary borders and why this border region is very important. Understanding the European aspect of minority rights, because this was the most discussed issue during the transition period, not only in Southeast Europe actually, but also in Eastern European countries because they have many problems with the so-called human rights issues, and especially tackling the problems with the minority rights. Then connecting it with the European integration and the regional integration that Europe wants actually to highlight nowadays with the European integration of the region. And what does this cross-border cooperation mean, both for the countries and also for the policies of the European Union? And I believe it provides also a very good opportunity to tackle the difference between Bulgaria and Greece, because Greece is an old EU member that didn't pass the same path with Bulgaria while joining the EU, because Bulgaria had to pass totally different membership negotiations and also was set on several different criteria compared to Greece. And finally, by summing up the presentation, I will speak how actually both countries nowadays stand in terms of minority rights, and also how do they perceive minorities vis-a-vis regional integration as EU member states. So just going forward, briefly as a definition, the only one I could find in literature is perhaps the one that was done by Kapatorti in 1977 during the preparations of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But this obviously definition was not accepted as a valid one, where minority was defined briefly as a group numerically inferior to the rest of the population and non-dominant position, whose members being the nationals of the state that possess ethnic, religious, or linguistic characteristics different from those of the rest of the population, and show, if only implicitly, a sense of solidarity directed towards preserving their culture, traditions, religion, or language. Unfortunately, several states, including Greece, submitted very interesting comments regarding this definition, especially Greece, saying that this definition is quite vague, and it could possess, they mentioned this sentence especially, it could possess a threat to the national sovereignty of the countries if it is being accepted with this state. And unfortunately, the definition could not be accepted back then. When we look at the situation of the ethnic composition of the map in the Balkans in 1990, let's say briefly, you could see the following map also that shows Bulgaria and Greece, how and where the national minorities are living, and especially the areas where generally they are spread. However, I could also add additional remarks on the situation here on the border between Macedonia and Greece, because this part of the border has also quite numerous minorities. The Albanian-Greek border side has also, let's say, Albanian minority, while the Greek-Macedonian border has, especially in the Florina area, has a Macedonian minority, but right now, as they are not officially recognized by the state as such, this is not indicated on the map here. And here in Bulgaria, you could see mainly southern and northeastern regions, with being marked as areas where the minorities are living. And this is a Turkish minority in Bulgaria. How can we explain Bulgaria and Greece as countries, as a, let's say, nation states that deal with minority issues is briefly described here. But I must say that perhaps you have already know how the revival process in Bulgaria took place. And after the name-changing campaign, more than 300,000 people, and especially ethnic Turks, left Bulgaria for Turkey. And eventually, the country faced a new stage in its politics, where actually the communist regime ended. And apparently, 1/3 of the population that went to Turkey returned. But later in 1990s, they also went back or to Turkey or abroad to other European countries for work, because Bulgarian economic situation was facing several difficulties at that period. 1990 Constitution of Bulgaria, when it was adjusted to liberal democratic standards, did some changes. However, the Constitution didn't mention also the existence of national minorities or other groups in the country. It was only indicating that people of other origins could enjoy their language in the country as equal citizens to the Bulgarians. Transition process in Bulgaria also demonstrated how populist discourses were widely used in order to reject implementation of European values and normal liberal standards, because the mass exodus of the Turks in 1989 caused several economic problems that resulted with almost 20% losses for 4 consecutive years in the Bulgarian GDP. And eventually, corruption that took place in the country during the transition process in 1990s was highlighted with other reasons, nonetheless, without bringing a coherent solution to the issue of minority rights. And every reform that was proposed by the European countries or other civil society organizations was rejected by the regime, claiming that they have other priorities for Bulgaria, mainly fighting the corruption or bringing better economic standards for the Bulgarian people. This situation followed also after the Bulgarian candidacy to the European Union was approved. When the issue was mostly coming in front of the Bulgarian Socialist Party, even the contemporary one, the European Development of Bulgaria Party, that was that is actually governed by Borisov, still they don't bring coherent answers, or they can't answer what's the reason for lagging behind answering the liberal criteria for the minority rights regimes. When partial minority rights were offered to the Turkish minority along with the political, let's say, rights, still the constitution actually prohibits creation of political parties along ethnic and religious lines, which says that parties that could be created by the minority members are unconstitutional. So apparently, this means that minority members or minority groups don't have the right to participate politically in the country, or they don't have the right to create political parties and join the parliament with their own identity. And the use of Turkish language during the local elections or even the parliamentary elections is a huge problem, because only recently, a few years ago, the leader of the Turkish, the so-called Turkish Party, Movements for Rights and Freedom, was fined with 200 and let's say with 500 leva for making election propaganda in Turkish language, where he spoke only 2-3 sentences in Turkish by addressing a crowd in a small town in southern part of Bulgaria. When we speak, what does European integration mean? Before going to the issue with Greece, how it evolved, actually, I have to highlight also those issues here that are listed briefly in under the European integration part, because the European integration could be understood as an topic that would bring positive impact on the development of human rights, or at least normative changes in the constitution or political life of the country that could bring the, let's say, peaceful settlement of minority issues, and also allowing them to integrate into the country whilst keeping their own identity. European integration here, also while using this during the presentation, is meaning actually liberalization of the minority rights and human rights regime, and making positive changes that could allow minorities to preserve their own identity while also integrating into the country where they live. And one key concept here would be to differentiate between the Council of Europe and the European Council, because European Council is an institution of the European Union, while Council of Europe is a international organization where almost 45 countries in the European continent are members of. And European Convention of Human Rights is one of the most important documents that is bringing the contemporary setting of the, let's say, protection of human rights in the European continent. If you look briefly to the literature, we could obviously see that, and also politically that is widely discussed, that as such, that Europe is an area, or the European Union at least, is an area where minority rights and human rights are best protected by law and by the institutions. If someone is facing any problem or they feel that their rights are violated, they could go search for a remedy to the European Court of Human Rights. For obviously, in order to go to the European Court of Human Rights, a country does not need to have a membership in the European Union. Obviously, Council of Europe membership is enough for this. And also the European Covenant or Convention on Human Rights is the key document here, because countries, the signatory countries, are accepting all of the provisions of the document and the implementation of it. In 1990s, it's a very important period also for the Eastern European countries, where Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities was accepted. Several countries, especially the Eastern and Central European countries, signed the convention, and they began to implement it. However, Greece didn't sign. However, Greece signed the convention but didn't ratify it. Therefore, this convention and its provisions does not take any force in Greece, but they do take for Bulgaria, and they are binding for the country. The only difference, perhaps, between the old new member states, once again here during the European integration stage, that there are 35 chapters for a country as a candidate to close before joining the EU, and these chapters should be negotiated before the membership takes place. Mainly, these chapters are becoming very important topics during the membership process of the country, if they should discuss the issue of liberalization or economic issues. However, the human rights and minority rights are becoming as a topic coming to the agenda very often, if the country is having serious problems implementing those conditions. And here there is a difference between Greece and Bulgaria, because Greece had a totally different membership path than Bulgaria, and it could be here as an opportunity to use how efficient the European integration and negotiation processes during this, let's say, so-called problems, let's say, using them as a means to solve the minority rights issues. Briefly looking here at the map of Bulgaria, I wanted to show how in the recent parliamentary elections, the Turkish minority parties are gaining votes in the different parts of the region. This is just to show you population compositions where the ethnic minorities are usually living, and the Turkish minority in Bulgaria is living, or there is also Bulgarian, let's say, speaking Pomaks, who also likely vote for the Turkish political party here. And this is the, to give just impression that they are living in the border regions and the northeastern part of Bulgaria. When we look at the eastern trace, the western trace in Greece, we see that their issue has been settled with Turkey after the Lausanne Peace Treaty in 1923. Because back then it was the treaty that ended the war, the First World War between Greece and Turkey too. And this treaty had some provisions to settle the minority issues. According to this treaty, the term Muslim was mentioned for the Turkish minority in Greece, while the term Greek was mentioned for the Greek minority in Turkey back then. And because of the use of this term, there are so many problems connected nowadays that continue to be as bone of contention between in the bilateral relations of Greece and Turkey. While I just explain you briefly, because the Western trace and the political sensitivity of the composition of the Turkish or Muslim minority there, because the Greek authorities still prefer to recognize the Turkish minority in Western trace as only religious one, non-ethnic one, because according to them, the definition of the term, the Muslim, is enough for the minority, because this was used as a term in 1923, and therefore they cannot extend this definition into ethnic identity. But another illiberal situation that took place in Greece was the Article 19 of the Greek Citizenship Code, where there was an article to strip off the citizenship of non-ethnic Greeks if they go abroad for several days back then. Article 19 of the Greek Citizenship Code said briefly that a person of non-Greek or ethnic origin leaving Greece without an intention to return may be declared as having lost their Greek citizenship. This article was accepted in 1955 and amended in 1998, however, retrospectively. Therefore, the country officially not recognizing ethnic minorities when trying to give some rights to them is actually detecting them during the process of stripping off their citizenship. And between 1955 and 1998, almost 6,000 people, mainly ethnic Turks, have lost their Greek citizenship. Since the article, with the pressure of Europe, was amended in 1998, it was retrospective one, and many people were left stateless without citizenship for decades, either in Germany or in Turkey. The one interesting point of this issue was that the implementation of the article was also against the free movement rule and rights in the European Union, because some people, some Turkish people from Western Thrace went to Germany as guest workers in 1980s by using the free movement rights in Europe. And 2-3 weeks later, they got letter from the Greek government, or without even being informed for that their Greek citizenship is actually not active anymore. Or they could learn this briefly when they are coming home or returning only for summer holidays, and other cases as well. And other interesting cases of losing the Greek citizenship was also Turks who are coming to Istanbul or to Bursa for 1 week only to visit their relatives. And soon after they leave the Greek border to Turkey, their citizenship was being cancelled suddenly, and they could learn that they are no more Greek citizens and don't have rights anymore to enter the country only after 1 week while trying to return to Greece. They know that their passport isn't valid anymore. And Athens was criticized and is still being criticized with being the only European capital without mosque, despite having both immigrant and minority population of Muslim faith. So this being the one of the reasons not actually being complying with the European rules of providing rights for the minorities. And also the Greeks trying to reduce the standards of minority guarding or not accepting any contemporary European regulations. Another interesting point that also took place during this summer in July 2021 was the protest of Turkish minority in Xanthi, northeastern part of Greece. To show you how Xanthi is on the map, you could see it here. This is the map of Greece, and this is Western Thrace. The interesting point here is that minority members in Western Thrace would benefit only from the rights of minority rights if they live within the borders of Western Thrace. Outside of this region, if they go for work or study into other cities of Greece, they don't have these rights there. So they are only restricted rights for this area. And Xanthi as a city is somewhere here on the map. And last summer, they began again to have a protest regarding the registration of the Xanthi Turkish Union. What's the main problem here is a Turkish Union that has been created in 1927 was shut down in 2005 according to the decision of the Greek Court of Cassation, which said that the using of the word Turkish is harming public order in Western Thrace, and therefore this organization cannot exist anymore. And when the issue was further taken to the Greek court and to the European Court of Human Rights, finally, the decision of the European Courts of Human Rights was very sharp regarding the situation. They said that Greece actually violated Articles 11 and 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights, because the Regional Court of Xanthi concluded that they were not obliged to apply the decisions taken by the European Court of Human Rights. The case has been forwarded to the Greek Court of Cassation, which on February 24, 2012 decided that the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights are not binding. Therefore, the Xanthi Turkish Union is not allowed to continue its activities because it addresses Turkish as an ethnic identification on their name. So coming to this issue, you could briefly see here people last summer protesting again and asking the country institutions to register their union as Turkish Union in the area. However, still the Greek officials are not implementing even the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. One note could be added here is that the Greek officials said that when referring to a minority in Western Thrace, their understanding in line with the Lausanne Treaty in 1923 is only a Muslim minority. However, in the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, the court briefly said to the Greek authorities explicitly, telling them that the recognition of the country and its institutions are also important. However, they are not the key fact to count if there is a minority or not. Self-identification of the minority, of their identity, is enough for them to claim and ask for a recognition of the state institutions. Here is a picture of also while the country is being criticized for not having a mosque in its capital. And since 20 years, the Greek officials, Ministry of Foreign Affairs usually is in this situation, promising the Muslim immigrants and also minority members that they will build a mosque in the center of Athens. This is a mosque actually left from the Ottoman Empire period, and it was built in 1759, which is the area mosque. But unfortunately, as you see, the reason when they were asked why still there is not mosque in Athens is that usually they claim that there is no money or funding for that. But however, you could see many abandoned mosques or mosques turned into museums or libraries or let's say other venues. but the reconstruction of a mosque could be very easily, but still they are rejecting this claim made by the citizens and by immigrant groups living in Greece. Another interesting situation with the Greece is the so-called Greek military surveillance zone, because normally it's not mentioned in so many, let's say, articles, but the existence of this unofficial military surveillance zone was fact up until the early 2000s, let's say. Its active implementation stopped perhaps in late 1990s, early 2000s. This is a military surveillance zone, which is quite interesting to define, and it was defined according to the sensitivity of the Greek territorial claims, or let's say not territorial claims, but Greek security sensitivities in the area. This first aspect of the zone was defined in line with the realities of the post-Second World War, because they thought that in order to save themselves from the communist threat, they defined a military surveillance zone all around the line between Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Albania at that time. However, later on, they decided to enlarge the zone and keep it larger and larger from time to time in order to navigate very easily around, because the entry and exit into the villages and cities that were remaining within this military surveillance zone was strictly controlled by the police and by the military. And people could not leave the area, for instance, earlier at 7 a.m. in the morning, and they couldn't enter between 8 p.m. in the evening and 7 a.m. in the morning there. Only those people who live in the area or certain village, mountainous or isolated part of the country could enter and exit within given time limits. And many interesting aspects of this issue is that, and very, let's say, discussed point nowadays is, this is the area where actually national minorities of the country are living. And because of this region, you could see here the dates where the zone was first actually created in 1956, and later on enlarged and keeping increasing, especially in the areas where minorities are living. Basically, it could be seen as an area where basic human rights were also limited for certain period, including the mobility and freedom of traveling around. This is becoming another issue also while Bulgarian membership in the European Union was taking place, because a part of the route that the European Union was defined as a pan-European corridor took place in the Western Thrace. So showing you how the area is important nowadays is the Rhodope Mountains. Here you can see the German map, obviously, showing the regional importance of the area. And this is the area showing you how which part of it is eligible for the European cross-border cooperation, because European cross-border cooperation is allowing the member states of the European Union to cooperate, but it's actually a program that begins soon after a candidate country that plans to join the European Union to communicate better with the EU member state. So what the European Union does here is they offer the candidate and member countries budget and funding, usually, to organize joint events in the border regions, where especially to save the border regions and to turn them actually points of attraction or economic movement, instead of being considered as peripheries and being isolated or the least developed parts of the country. This is what the European pan-European corridor means. This is the actually map of the highways in Europe, which Europe is keeping still building. And the pan-European 9 corridor is passing from here. This is a road that is connecting all the way Helsinki to Alexandroupoli. Let's say from Helsinki to Tallinn and all the way from Northern Europe to the south and coming to Alexandroupoli, Greece. Why is it important? I will have to explain you briefly now, and to see it in a closer distance, what does the map mean here? And the road is important because during the building process of the road, Bulgarian authorities managed to build the road earlier than the Greek authorities, because the project was supposed to finish in 2005. When Bulgaria joined the EU in 2007, they were already supposed to finish the project, and the road between Bulgaria and Greece to end up finally allowing the countries to launch several border crossing points here. Here on the map, you could see the other border crossing points. Here there is not any problem between Bulgaria and Greece. Here there is not any problem as well. And also between Orestiada here in the northeastern part of Greece, there is not any problem. But nevertheless, the problem occurred when the road was built between Komotini and Karjali. Why? Because the issue here, if you remember the map I showed you from the very beginning, this is an area that is widely populated by the minority members. And from the side, actually, from one side, actually, it could be thought that this is all problem because of the mountainous landscape of the area. No, it's not, because both Kırjali and Komotini are cities where Turkish and Muslim minorities do live, and therefore, not for Bulgaria, but for Greece, for a while, the implementation of the project was posing a threat, because some of the public officials in Greek side were bringing the map of the so-called Turkish, let's say Western Thrace Republic that lived only for 3 months after the Balkan Wars, was established here, composing the population, Muslim Turkish population in the area. So they thought that if this infrastructure is being built, they will be again communicating with each other, and therefore another irredentist movement could take place. So this was the reinterpretation of the history in line with populist political aims in order to stop building the European project. This was mostly actually a protest by Eurosceptic political parties and political, let's say, groups who were against opening the border, the so-called Nymphaea Makaza border region between Bulgaria and Greece. If you look what this project has taught us was to understand how actually minority areas are still being considered as a bone of contention, especially if we try to navigate between these two countries where understanding of nation state is quite rigid and limited one. To conclude briefly, I could say still that despite the European integration phase was perceived as an opportunity for both countries to liberalize their minority rights regime, it is still considered to be a missed opportunity also for Bulgaria, because the country was more inclined to conduct reforms during the European negotiation process, where now there is kind of reluctance to accept certain political reforms after they joined the EU. It was European Union's idea to allow both Romania and Bulgaria into the EU, believing that once they are becoming EU members, they will keep doing reforms. However, it didn't take place in the situation of minorities. Also, currently, since the region is quite busy with immigrant and refugee flows, now the situation of minority rights is being again neglected. But also considering it, how does the topic still is being pursued by large-scale political circles, I could say that involvement of civil society is even very limited, because this type of traditions do not exist in the post-communist Bulgaria, unfortunately, one could say that transition didn't go very well in the region. And from the aspect of Greece and Bulgaria, and especially for the right-wing parties, the reinterpretation of the old historical issues in line with contemporary political problems is being a real problem and handicap to bring modern or liberal political solutions to the issues that pertain still today. And the restitution of properties, not only the recognition of minority rights, but also the restitution of the properties is being another problem that has to be solved. Still, nobody wants to consider this issue. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much,
I hope
Nuri.
I am on time.
Yes, you're totally on time. Perfect. All right, let's stop sharing. There we go. I'm going to go back to gallery. Yay, I see lots of virtual clapping. And we're going to have now a Q&A period. So if anyone in the audience the virtual audience has a question,
So
please raise your hand.
with the internet connection? Because
There
I
were-
was
well,
having additional
actually,
program.
there were just moments where you were kind of going, "Rrrr," but we could
Okay.
hear it. I didn't miss anything. Maybe one
Okay.
frame, it would slow down and speed back up. So it actually turned out fine, but I was a little worried there. But overall,
I mean, you
no
could just interrupt and I would repeat it, I mean, without any problem.
Not a problem. Thank
Yeah.
you very much for this entry or for this very thought-provoking and I think timely intervention. And I'm really excited to discuss. I hope that our audience as well. I certainly have questions, and I'm sure pretty much Professor Neuberger and probably members of our audience. So if you don't mind, we should probably start the Q&A session, Nuri.
Sure.
Absolutely. Dr. Neuberger, may I take the lead?
yes, please do.
Thank you very much. Nuri, first of all, thanks for the panoramic overview, and especially it's important when you were talking about conditionality of what Greece and Bulgaria were willing to do during prior to negotiation, during the negotiation, and after the negotiation. One of my first questions will be quite provocative, I suppose, because it will concern the role of DPS in Bulgarian politics, specifically in the past 10 or so years. And my question goes twofold. I want you to comment, if possible, first of all, on what your impression is on the whether it's a positive, negative, and so on role, in essence, in encapsulating the Turkish vote, and not only. When you were showing us the geography, the political geography of the spread, first of all, whether this encapsulation is a positive phenomenon. And number two, how do you read the broader signals that the Bulgarian society and large, majority and minorities alike, as to reaction of inclusion of people like Dilian Peevski and their role in the agenda setting and formation of DPS, having in mind that the longtime leader is not leading the party anymore currently, but he has this honorary chair position, which is very ambiguous to my understanding. And this is the first two questions. And on the other side of the border, do you see similarity in any political processes in the Greek political scene, or it is rapidly different? Just kind of like a comparative analysis for all of us, if that's possible.
Okay, sure. I mean, thank you so much for this question, because I wanted to give briefly what the situation looks like in a broader perspective. But yeah, this goes very well with the actually thing that I wanted to highlight here is the role of the DPS. In my opinion, they are labeled as a minority party, but they don't have any bill proposed to the parliament in terms of the rights of minorities. And also their ex-leader, Doğan, he is perfectly known for being an agent of national security during the communist regime. So he is the one actually who created the party, and they just 10 years ago showed that he was a member of the Bulgarian National Security Service back then. So apparently this party is perceived as a minority party, but on the other side, it doesn't have, or it didn't bring any positive aspect for the rights of the minorities in the country. Because I don't see that they have 3 members now in the European Parliament as well. And also in the national parliament, they are having approximately 30 to 40 seats. And unfortunately, they don't have any bill proposed for the liberalization of the minority rights.
And also they sit in the liberal
area.
group in the European Parliament.
Exactly.
They belong to ALDE, you know, so
Yeah,
this is also...
I mean, if you look, what happened in Bulgaria is very interesting during the communist regime. They stopped recognizing or implementing any sort of treaties they signed with the Ottoman Empire and later on with Turkey. Suddenly, all the minority rights that were there stopped existing. And after the 1990s, none of them was given back to the minority, including the property ownerships of the Waqf of the, let's say, Mufti organization there. And nowadays, when there are cases in the Bulgarian courts, they briefly say that we can't have any documents verifying that the Mufti institution that we have right now has any connection to the Mufti organization back then. How come? I mean, that's another issue.
That is the general Mufti, General Mufti,
yeah,
you mean?
There is only one Mufti in Sofia. And then you have the other regional ones that all connected with the general Mufti in Sofia, let's say, in other cities. Coming to your question about Greek politics, oh my God, that's another issue that I find very fascinating, because Greece is the first country I met after Bulgaria, where the left is from time to time turning into nationalist far right in certain issues when it comes to minorities, especially the PASOK party. When I look into the voting regarding the voting behavior of the ethnic Turks or Pomaks or Roma in Western Thrace, they all are likely to vote for the left wing, the PASOK, Papandreou, let's say, party. However, when it comes to national minority topics, even this party from time to time has very extreme opinions on not normalizing or liberalizing the minority, the treatment of the minority in Western Thrace. Another issue here with the Greek political debate, in this aspect, I could say that there is a connection between PASOK and the Bulgarian Socialist Party now. Because the Bulgarian Socialist Party was supposed to be left-wing. However, since they inherited all this party and institution, and also maybe the political ideology of the Bulgarian communists, this is why they don't have this liberal look into the minority politics. This is one case. But if I look at the center-right in Greece, especially right now the ruling party, Neo Demokratia, I could say they have obviously a sharp view, because their relations with Turkey right now isn't also very well, despite the father of the of the current prime minister asked for a refuge in Turkey when there was a military junta in Greece. They are not very willing to have this liberal attitude regarding the minorities, because Greece is trying to limit any liberalization process with the Lausanne Peace Treaty in 1923. Therefore, they don't want to recognize new rights that are actually taking place somewhere else in Europe, because they say that the Greece doesn't have any other obligations. They know that somehow they will get away with that if they don't implement any European decisions. Simply, they could say that it's our national security that is at stake here, and therefore this is how they justify this illiberal.
So the
story.
umbrella term, basically what you're saying is that the national security umbrella overshadows any
Exactly.
other discussion on this. Thank
Correct.
you, Nuri, for addressing this. I know that, I mean, that's a lot to unpack, you know, like in parallel, but you've taken a good stab at it. Dr. Neuberger.
Yeah, first gonna say, Christian, your child is so cute. Show your baby again. But anyway,
Oh,
look
oh,
how
thank you.
adorable she is. Oh my goodness, she's lovely. No, okay, so Nuri, I loved your talk, and it just makes me think of the complexity of this whole area and this, you know, the road trip you talked about doing. It just sounds fascinating, but I'm, you know, it makes me think about the complexity of these cross-border populations and the historic kind of fluidity, of course, and complexity of identities in the region. But in particular, you know, thinking about today and the definition of, you know, who is a minority and who is not, I guess makes me think about how historically all of these neighboring groups, let's just take Bulgaria, particularly Bulgaria, Greece, and I guess less so Turkey, but let's just say Bulgaria and Greece in particular, but also the Serbs and various Slavic groups. One of the ways, and Macedonia, I didn't mean to not say Macedonia, but because it's a more recent political configuration, there was a tendency to not think in terms of minorities, to think in terms of diasporas, but also to in terms of other groups, thinking of them as actually an extension of your own group who have been either converted to another religion or have been assimilated to another language group. Mm-hmm. So when you know, Greeks, for example, think of the Slavs as they're really Greek, but who happen to take on a Slavic language, or when the Bulgarians think of Turks as really Bulgarians who happen, which again is more of an extreme Bulgarian view, but particularly if you think about Pomaks, they think about them as really Bulgarians who've taken on Islam. You know, it starts to make this whole idea of what a minority is really complicated and easy for them to, you know, like that kind of mentality comes into the present with, like you said, like they're a religious minority, but they're still Greeks. Like we're not going to give them the status of a minority. Yeah. So adding to that, the complication now of Macedonia thinking there's an unrecognized minority of Macedonians in Bulgaria, and Bulgaria thinking there's an unrecognized minority of Bulgarians in Macedonia. This just kind of feeds into this whole question of who gets to decide if they're a minority. And like you said, in the European view, it's if they call themselves a minority, then they are. But that seems to not be the thinking of many of these official institutions. So I don't know if that's more of a comment than a question, but
I have quite interesting answers to that, but I just want to begin with the very interesting road trip I have made from Greece to Macedonia, but I want to show it also on the map, the area briefly, what to expect where. Here it is actually. So I took a cab from, just see. I hope you see the map here. I took a cab from Florida when I was living in Thessaloniki as a student, as a PhD researcher. I took a cab from Florida to go to Bitola, which is 15 minutes away from, Greek border. It's in the Macedonian part. And a very interesting situation took place there because I had to bargain with the taxi driver in Greek. And it was very difficult for me because my knowledge of Greek is very limited. And somehow we managed to reduce the price with 5-10 euros only. But once we were on the border, because obviously there is no public transport. Very interesting thing. Still, that despite the fact that Macedonia was recognized as an EU candidate country, with the pressure of the Europe, Greece didn't want to have this cooperation coming and going in between two countries. And especially, they are quite protective of the border zone. For them, this border is a very strong, solid understanding where the border isn't porous at all. Because this porosity of the borders is very important, which means that there is a flow of people and somehow there is dialogue.
Cross-border traffic, yeah.
And between Greece and Macedonia, this doesn't take place. What happened is that on the Greek side, we just showed our IDs. I showed my Bulgarian ID and I passed to the Macedonian part, and we are at the same taxi together with my friend. And when we were on the Macedonian border, Bulgaria just changed their IDs. And I got the new ID only like 2 weeks ago. On the Macedonian border, they checked my ID, they looked at it, and the guy asked me in Bulgarian if this is the new Bulgarian ID cards. And I said, yes, those are the new, and they are just being, newly issued. And he said, so I can accept this one. I said, of course you should accept this. It's a government document. And the taxi driver also gave his document. And he was 35, 40 years old guy. And apparently when we entered the Macedonian soil, North Macedonia, let's say officially, Macedonian soil back then, he asked me, aren't you Turkish? How do you speak Macedonian? I said, I didn't speak Macedonian. It's Bulgarian. But I said, like, aren't you Greek? How do you speak Macedonian? And he said, yeah, I'm Greek, but my grandma used to speak it at home. This is how I learned it. I said, then you are Macedonian. And he said, no, I'm not Macedonian. My grandma and family is, but I'm Greek. So this is, you began to understand at that period. Then going into the issue, what happened is that during the military junta period there were people who were forcibly actually forced to abandon the Macedonian language and their Slavic identity and turn it into a Greek, let's say, name ending, especially in the surnames, and to mostly use Greek also in the daily communication. This is the similar situation, could be seen like, for instance, if the surname of the person is Zaev or Zaykov, he became Zaykos. If the surname of the person is, for instance, Ilian or Ilianov, he became Ilianidis, Ilianos, not Ilianidis, because this is a type of ending only for people who come from Pontiac, from Pontus, let's say. They have this type of idis, idu ending. But it's very interesting to see how they had to abandon this. And nowadays, at home, they still, even today, in a, let's say, more liberal setting, where there is not this type of like systematized government pressure, people still try to keep their IDs secret. And another case I faced was in Ceres, especially with Vlah minority members. I have never, I didn't know that there is Vlah population there in Ceres and Drama area, unless you go to talk to people in cafeteria, or some of them, they were my students, fellows at the university. This is how I met them. And this was quite interesting to observe, but obviously the government doesn't want to give this type of security sensitive perspective, comes from Western trace. No, because they actually have it almost anywhere in the country, but this is not a danger, this is just diversity. It's an opportunity for them to increase this diversity, because all the European integration and European project is built upon preserving this diversity, not to oppress or to exterminate it. I mean, this is a diversity, but this is how the democratic, let's say, discourse doesn't take place in the country. And the border regions, usually because of being periphery, let's say, observed peripheries for them, they could see that they could actually easily navigate there without any sort of democratic limitation, and where many illegal things took place and still continue to take from time to time. And coming to the your question about who decides who is a minority, how to deal with it, I see nowadays, unfortunately, the countries, unless they see a pressure from bigger EU member states such as Germany, France, In the back, it was England. Now, not anymore. They don't feel eager to make any adjustment on that, because what happens is that who is the first EU member? If they have any problem with their neighbors, they are being more powerful, using the European Union as a leverage to settle up the minority and border issues. Because unless you agree with your neighboring country or you reach permanent settlement on that issue, you could veto briefly or block the EU membership of that country, which happened for decades now for Greece regarding the EU membership of or NATO membership of Macedonia. Right now, the same issue goes, which is connected actually with Bulgaria as well, because Bulgaria doesn't want to recognize the Macedonians or the Macedonian minority or Macedonian nation in general. And this is why Bulgaria tries to block the EU membership of Macedonia. This is not directly the membership, but still it means they are blocking the membership, because they are blocking the closing and the opening stage of the negotiation chapters. Because in order for the country to join the EU, they have to quickly pass through the negotiation process. And you see here, all this area is quite problematic in terms of settling the minority issues, border problems, and national, binational problems, let's say. And the European Union's cross-border cooperation policy here doesn't work very good. This is why actually we need more Europe in the region, in the area, than the national governments.
Well, Nuri, this is, something that I just, I'm sorry to insert myself before I'm thinking the other comments, but great answer. Could you just please comment on the state of, because there was a thought of a great instrument of those cross-border projects, right? I mean, while in all, in older and new member states, and while you were passing through conditionality, I thought in my mind specifically about the success, and especially when you're given the examples of Makaza and so on, points of friction between countries, in terms of opening border crossings and so on. Do you have an assessment of the success of the cross-border regional projects, supported by the EU, as per your map that you were showing, in terms of eligibility and so on, and how much of that has been successful, you think, in your opinion, and how much it was put or imitated? Let's put it this way.
Well, I see a success, quite good one, especially in the Makaza Komotini area. But the only unsuccessful one I could show you is between Greece and Turkey. The only let's say unsuccessful example, because I mean it's a totally different topic, because I shouldn't jump in there, but I have to say, in the Makaza Komotini case, this is the very successful one, especially connecting south of Bulgaria with northeastern part of Greece. And this was actually by some experts, this was commented as Europe being the next empire in the region, because they were trying to revive an old Ottoman route, which was used to connect Komotini and Kırjali, because before the strong border was set up there after the Cold War, after the Second World War period. All the people, for instance, I'm from Kırjali and I'm only 10 kilometers away from the Greek border where my village is. All my grandparents, for instance, or relatives, they were going to Komotini to buy flour because their products were much better. And they were not, they didn't need to go there with a car. It was simple. They were using simple horses or donkeys to travel the area. And because at that time, the technology wasn't that much advanced. The most interesting thing I could say is the infrastructure. The same infrastructure was built, or let's say developed, also during the German army. From 1941 till 1945, there are bridges roads built by them. It's very interesting to see. They are still actually standing there. And the Bulgarian government didn't abolish any of them. They only did new reconstruction and they are using it. And now what happens with the European one is Europe is trying kind of to revive this old Ottoman route, because this is a very strategic point. It's like a crossroad from the Aegean Sea to the Balkans from one point, because this is they have to navigate to the through this road. Apparently, it actually a bit north of center part of Bulgaria. It also crosses the road that comes all the way from Istanbul and goes to up until Vienna, let's say.
Yeah,
This is what they try to do. In a way, they see Europe as being the new empire. Another issue I could say, the problem to highlight it, the Komotini and Kırjali, despite being two border towns, their cross-border cooperation was not set until 2005. I mean, they had to wait 15 years after the fall of communism to become twin towns. Like, this twinning is quite interesting thing, because the two towns have to come together and organize joint events. So from the Turkish side, if they come together, apparently they either take let's say kids from the elementary school or high schools to organize these events, like let's say folk dances or songs. And mostly, if the two cities are organizing an event, it will be a Turkish song or Bulgarian song and Turkish song together. However, from the Greek side, they never have the minority schools joining. It's only the Greek schools that the people see on that peer side. And also, the very interesting sensitive point for the Greek institutions is the mayor of Kırjali is Turkish. So for them, it's one step, let's say, that is actually one thing that is actually keeping them from cooperating directly with Kırjali in most situations, because they don't want to have him directly addressing each time.
Thank you, Nuri. Teşekkür.
Sure. Can I ask another question? So I guess I was just thinking about what you just said about sort of more Europe. We need more sort of European style, or, you know, dictated or sort of minority type frameworks and rights in this area. And I guess it just sort of made me think about how, I guess from the very beginning of the creation of Balkan states, it was the European powers that set up via treaties these states and demanded that there be minority rights encoded in constitutions. But the problem was, from the very beginning, the new Balkan states looked at Western Europe, or, you know, even beyond the United States later, and said, yeah, but you don't protect your own minority populations, but you expect us to protect ours. And furthermore, why are you deciding like what a minority is and what we should do to protect them? So I think there's a way in which these ideas of definitions of minority and specific kind of institutions for protecting minorities coming from the outside actually cause resentment, like you said, like new European empire. They actually create pushback and backlash. And in some ways, I mean, to be devil's advocate, I think there's a lot of homegrown models of recognizing difference, like the Ottoman ones, and others that actually are more oriented towards collective, kind of recognizing sort of and encoding collective rights than Western liberal constitutions, which tend to focus on citizenship and saying basically, if you're a citizen, you have equal rights. Like in the United States, like, do we actually have minority rights? Not as collective rights, only as individual rights. So I just wonder, like, how do we kind of, I guess, how can we help these areas, or policy-wise tap into, I guess, their own ideas of how to protect minorities without making it feel like they're being imposed from the outside by countries that aren't necessarily so great at dealing with their own minority populations?
Well, I think that the change of the generation is necessary. First thing, because right now, if I speak to young people, they are more tolerant in many aspects. One thing is this, but the second one, I believe it's also coming from the lack of resources, because for many aspects, actually, Bulgaria, when they were joining the EU in 2007, they were believing that quite quickly they will get one of the rich countries in the Balkans, or Switzerland of the Balkans. However, when they realized that it didn't take place after now more than a decade in the EU, they knew that this is a question of implementation of successful political reforms. It's not only in terms of minorities, it's a general political climate that is not liberal, unfortunately, because you have the ex-political elite who is still governing the country from some aspects. And also they are allowing only a circle of people whom they know very well, included in their circle of friendships. This type of networking is harming the country in general, I have to say. And another issue here is perhaps from so many aspects, Europe is trying to do it through economic incentives by giving the country some funds, money for local or regional infrastructure construction. And the country in return is doing these reforms. But actually, they have to already do these reforms during the negotiation process with the EU. But here, I could say that some inconsistencies, if you read back about the progress reports regarding Bulgaria and Romania, up until 2007, they joined the EU. You could see so many inconsistent sentences on the progress reports of both countries, not only for the rights of minorities, but also for fighting the corruption in the country, for setting up the institutions in the country, for implementing the political reforms. 1 year, for instance, the Commission says in 2003 progress report, says that Bulgaria did very well reforms and implementations regarding the rights of the Roma and the Turkish minority in the country. Then the second year, the year after, you see that the country is, let's say, quite behind than the expected level in terms of treatment of the national minorities and the other issues and fighting the corruption.
Political compromise, Nuri, that's what it's called, I think.
If you go, like you believe that actually they use this report as a template where they change some sentences from year to year, and apparently they submit again the same report, because more or less they are the same actually things and paragraphs, even not changing. You could basically
cut and paste.
Yeah, one page and after, where you could find the issue with the minority rights. Unfortunately, this is not very well organized reform level. But I have to say also in terms of political reforms, not only pertaining to minority rights or human rights generally, European Union, when they were criticized in 2015 and 2016, why actually there is a failed transition, and especially these non-democratic discourses in Poland, in Hungary, and having other problems with Romania and Bulgaria as well. When the European Union was criticized, some people briefly said that actually it's not Europe, it's their old political elite. But on the other side, I could say that Europe does not have the same resources, economic resources, and also other capabilities to democratize and transform these countries as it had for Spain and Portugal and also Greece, because there is not the same level of budget that is allocated to give to these countries. And even if they give
context as well, Nuri. Yeah, I would agree. I'm sorry to cut you through, but exactly what you're describing is like the limits of conditionality, right? You know, if we do have stick and carrot policies, I mean, look at some of the, you know, it's illustrative. I think what you were just saying about this very important dynamic of the local elites, especially, you know, when we talk about Bulgaria, you know, not so much the old members, but with the new one, is when you're seeing this mentality of we are already in the club, right? You know, I mean, what else could happen? You know, like the next thing, you know, that they need to do is a radical, drastic decision, which will hurt the union itself, right? You know, if we have to go radical on a clause of like frozen and so on. But we keep forgetting that during Stanishev's government, money were frozen, and there were strong signals and so on. What is beyond me, I guess, is when you were saying, and I think you touched upon it, because of those political reforms, they need to go through legislation, they need to go through on parliamentary level implementation, assessment of what that will do. And again, this is why I've asked you, and provoked you on the role of DPS, for instance, because it also goes through coalition making, right? When not now that Bulgaria is heading, towards yet new round of elections, it'd be interesting again, this electoral mathematics, how it plays out and what it means, for this environment. And likewise, just to remind something which I think you touched upon as well, which is a very important topic as well. Post 2008, 2009 Greek internal politics, after the bailout and so on, and how that had a radical change, I think, in discourse as to about policies of allocation and reallocation, because a lot of it, right, goes through sometimes very uncivil debate about
this is
access
coming.
and
This is
opportunity.
coming from a topic to a topic, Kirill, because what we learned in Eastern Europe is generally, I could actually also use this discourse for many Eastern European countries, almost all of them, is the increase of populist discourses, because people actually, even average people or average political parties could be in favor of formal political institutions or formal institutions where the accountability is very high. But sometimes why the populist resorts to other informal political institutions is because for them, let's say their accountability is reduced compared to the formal one. And sometimes, depending on a topic, if it's like, let's say, be it health policies, healthcare policies, be it economic one, or minority rights wise, or let's say, general condition of the country, or the corruption, when the corruption issue is raised in the Bulgarian political discourse, everybody is trying to bring another issue to cover it up, because they try to perceive their agenda in order to remain untackled. So this is like a chain. And unfortunately, people, even average people, from time to time, they could resort to these populist movements in order to cover up a topic and try to go through populist movements where they formal, where they create their own informal circles.
That's again, I didn't want it to this way, but just I thought that those are connected issues that you're talking about. And of course, quite obviously, as I said, the coin, in my mind has two sides as well, and this is unfortunately with this big cancer is state capture corruption, into which you see, all kinds of actors trying to make the best out of it, not only populists, but, like in the case of DPS, in my mind, is you're trying to encapsulate the vote, you're trying to divide quote unquote the portions and never forget who's that. And not only that, but I think there is also an adverse effect when it comes to European funds, which are misused, and the level of cynicism among the citizens because of the misuse of those projects, which is at the heart of the scandals, right? Allocation budget or finances from the national budgets, but also gross abuse, sometimes of corruption connected to external funding, which comes.
But it took place also for Greece at that time, not only for Bulgaria. I was explaining the road had to be built by 2005. Bulgaria completed it, and the Greek side didn't complete. But then later on, they said that since they had the economic crisis, they used the money for something else. And apparently, even Borisov offered Greece some few million euros to build 1 kilometer that remained there for 5 years. The roads project had to be opened and launched in 2007 when Bulgaria became officially EU member state, and they had to postpone it until 2013 when the border was finally open, and it's only a simple crossing point.
Nuri,
Well,
those are
maybe
the,
your relatives could have worked on it with their donkey carts.
Nuri,
Yeah,
those are
yeah, they could have done.
the tales of corruption from the region, which I think could be cataloged. But in essence, I would like to thank you, for this wonderful discussion on very serious and problematic topics. When we were able to address them and not shy away, actually, to speak about the both sides of controversies in terms of identity. Also, one thing that I thank you for, and I think Dr. Newberger as well, is to remind us about the rich complexity. I was captivated today when you were talking about Ceres and the Vlach minority, and this is why I think we will continue in Balkan Circle to rediscover the wonderful part of the world called the Balkans, because it is Sharan as Guber. We constantly have and we were actually pondering for a while, actually, whether we should use this as a symbol as well, or Shevica, where you have all these ethno-national elements incorporated that live together for ages. And yet, each and every time, the palette is so rich that a new story emerges, a new lesson that is not only important for the people that are connected to, like us, to the region, but for scholars, and also larger lessons about social dynamics, about culture, which could be taught through and utilized by other societies because of this rich heritage. So thank you very much once again. Dr. Newberger, thank you very much for having yet another interesting session. Thank you, благодаря. Teşekkür, leka večer.
Довиждане. We will see you.
Leka večeri, pozdrav
Yeah.
od Bursa.
Благодаря, поздрави на Бурса.
Oh yeah, I want to come to Bursa and go on that road
Teşekkürler.
trip.
Sure, you're
Nuri Bey.
welcome.
Teşekkürler da, извинявам се, да, Християн. Нали teşekkürler, Nuri?
Да,
Teşekkürler.
teşekkürler.
Evet.
Teşekkürler.
Няма значение, то, но ние може да
Teşekkür-
си говорим на
Yeah.
български без проблеми.
Nuri Bey
Благодаря.
Bulgaristan'dan selamlar. Çok
Ben de
teşekkür
selam
ederim.
söylüyorum sizlere. İyi akşamlar.
Thank you, Yuri. Nuri.
Tamam.
Sorry, I gave you your Bulgarian name there for a second.
Благодаря, Nuri. Колко е часа при вас в момента? What time is it?
It's 9:30.
9:30. Thank you very much for staying that late. We are aware,
No,
but
it's fine.
just,
It's fine. It's fine. Perfectly fine.
thank you.